Although, I think it was the second night we were there.
Uh-huh.
Well, yeah, it was like the second or the third morning. My wife got up and she's like, there was like this shadow looking thing on the. We had like glass doors going outside, and then there was like curtains on it. She's like, "There's something weird on the curtains. What is that shadow? I don't know what that is." And she got up and looked. Bro, it was a Mondo spider. It was a gigantor, bro.
No.
It was so stinking huge. It was ridiculous.
Was it a tarantula?
It looked, bro. They said it's like a household spider. If that's a household spider, man, I don't want to
That's
go
a
back.
household spider?
See if I get a
That's
picture of it. If you can see it, I don't think I've got a picture of it.
It's like that dude who said, remember the guy who did the would you look at that? Would you just look at that? And
Yeah,
he said he called the pest control
yeah.
and said, "We've got chrysanthemums." he said, he said, he said, we got the chrysanthemums. And they're like, "What, sir? Chrysanthemums, big spiders." And and then he said, "Do you mean tarantulas?" He's like, "Whatever." Oh my, bro, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm flapping my arms to fly home.
There he goes.
I mean, come on.
Bro, that thing was massive.
They're
And
like, "Oh, it's a common house spider."
what's funny is I slept through the whole doggone thing.
Did you?
Slept
Did
through the
she?
whole thing. She she did a little kung fu on him and kicked him out the door, and we were all good to go. So, all right, let me get all this stuff shared out real quick here. You
so
can
they had a
entertain the masses.
so they had the chrysanthella. He said, this is, of course, this is not this is not me. This is the guy. I can't remember his. He has all of the different.
Yeah, well, what was that guy's name?
Remember the and he said
Did you look at
he
that
was
selling the car or looking at the
Skippy.
car or whatever?
Skippy. He says, "Hey, how you doing? My name's Skippy." And he would, yeah. And they had that one. He had the one, the mumbles,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and he was talking. He was ordering.
What was
I'll
that
let you
guy's
some
name?
Dr. Pumble. So he said the chrysanthella one was so funny because he says, I got chrysanthemums, and they said, I got a question. The stuff you spray them with, is it effervescent? And they're like, effervescent? And he's like, yeah, do it smell good? He did.
That's awesome.
And then he had the one where he calls and he says, I just got a pedicure and I was very offended because they said I had he said I had my feet were like had man toes or something like that. Man toes. And they're like, no, they asked, do you want Mentos?
Oh man. All right, I'm about done. I'm about there. Let me go to Twitter real quick. Post it there. And then I'll do this real quick. Repost. And we're good there. Turn the chat on. All right. Okay. I think we're all shared out, bro.
Let's go.
Hey, we got a
Ed
good crowd.
Bassmaster.
That's the dude, Ed Bassmaster. Yes.
Ed
How did I forget
Bassmaster.
that? Would you look at that?
Did you just look at it?
The car one is hysterical. The guy didn't
I
know
think
what to do.
Ed Bassmaster is, he's proof and evidence that you're kind of just enjoy your 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Just soak it all in while you get a chance.
yeah, you're gonna come. You're gonna come and go. You're gonna come and go.
100%. 100%. All right. Yeah. J Rod gives the thumbs up on the 4 p.m. podcast time, Ken.
Mm,
Gives us the thumbs up on it.
people
Oh,
are
man.
liking this.
That's it. That's it.
Hey, one of our Mobilized Church Network pastors gave the devotion for the North American Missions Directors and Planning Retreat.
Let's
And
go.
he
Who was
did a
that?
fabulous job.
Who?
Anthony Richard.
The Anthony Richard.
The, yeah,
Beast mode.
the Anthony Richard. He spoke about basically warding off feelings of hopelessness.
Mm,
He used as sort of as launching point the Bob Sorge book, Secrets of the Secret Place, which
very
is a
cool. Great
which is a
resource.
famous and popular book in the Mobilized Church Network.
It is one of the best sessions I've ever been in for church planners.
Mhm.
Was a session. It was a friend of mine, and he did a session called Stories I Never Tell.
Uh-huh.
And his whole thing was like, we always go and we always share the victory reports. We always share the positive things. He said, but today I'm going to tell you about all the things that didn't work, and but how through perseverance and God working in those situations, how it ended up producing something on the other side. It's so good, man. Because same thing. He's like, sometimes as church planners, like the comparison thing and whatever, and you feel like everybody else, everything is always working all the time for everybody else, and me, it's not. So it's good.
That's so good. That's so good. That's why I love. Recently, I've been watching low light videos, not highlight videos, low light videos of worst shots from the PGA Tour this year.
Does it make you feel better?
Scotty Scheffler's shank from the sand.
Oh,
during the Tour Championship.
That was terrible. It's a horrible shot.
It's awesome, man. I'm like,
I've done that in church golf league a couple times. That shot,
yeah,
that was amazing.
So it makes me feel like, well, at least the bad shots that I hit are like,
yeah,
they're just they're I just have them in greater frequency than
exactly. Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to line the fairways when I'm teed up on the box with like 10, not even 10 yards in between them. And bro, that would make me an absolute nervous wreck, man. But those guys are so ridiculous. I saw Bubba Watson. He got mad one time at the memorial. He got mad at a photographer because the guy wouldn't move, and he yelled at him like 3 times. And he said, "Fine, stay there. That's fine." And bro, he took a 4-iron and sizzled a 4-iron right over the top of him just because he was mad at him. I mean, literally, it didn't go any higher than like 15 feet off the ground, right over the top of the dude, and ended up perfectly down the middle in the right spot and everything. I'm like, those guys are just stupid. It's just a whole different level.
It's crazy. I was watching one time, and I told my wife, I said, those people that are standing there, he'd say, "Hey, can you move back a little bit?" I said, I would say, "You right there." I said, "I'm fixing to hit you in the forehead." Not because I want to, just because I will.
That's what's going to happen.
Because you're standing there. If you were standing 5 feet the other direction, I would hit you in the forehead.
Yeah, I would tell people, like, the best place you could possibly stand is right in the middle. Just stand right in the center of the fairway, and you'll be all right.
Yeah. Can y'all move to the green?
No chance I'm hitting you there. Oh, man. All right, I think we're good to go. You ready to rock?
Let's do that.
Let's do this thing, man. Let's do this
thing.
All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mobilized Church Podcast. This is Chris Dillingham alongside my big brother Kelly. Whoa, what?
Caraboa.
We're not even going to redo that. We're just going to keep it in
No,
there, bro. We got to
mumbles,
just roll with it.
mumbles.
First time in 4 years.
Skippy says, King Dillingham, Jenny the Third.
Ken Dillingham, I was going too fast. I was so excited to get that out there. Ken Dillingham Jr. the third
Yeah,
joining us today.
Yeah, you just got back from Colombia. That's a little bit of
It was Spanish.
Vocal. That's right. Vocal jet lag.
That's Junior the third in Spanish is what you just heard there. So that's what it was. I am determined to learn Espanol, bro. I'm gonna make it happen. Let's do that. Somebody needs to look up and give us the translation. What is the Spanish version of the Mobilized Church podcast?
That would be awesome.
We gotta know. We need a Spanish version. Somebody bust out the Google Translate and tell us what is the Mobilized Church podcast Espanol.
That's what I'm talking about.
We need it, man.
Funny.
We need it. I think it would work.
I know. I started to say, Ken Dillingham, Pepito the Third, or Pepito Trace. I'm like, you probably ought to search up what Pepito means before you say that.
For real. We all of a sudden we get flagged on YouTube.
Yeah. All of our Spanish people are going, no, you can't say that.
That's so funny, man. That is so funny. Well, we've had a little bit of travel and a lot of stuff going on. All right, so here it is. You ready? El podcast de la Iglesia Mobilizada. El podcast de la Iglesia Mobilizada.
Glad to have you with us today, everyone. There's a podcast that one goes into the top echelon of our podcast. My brother just broke out Spanish. He didn't look that up. That was a tongues and interpretation.
Oh, yes. He just gave it to me. Or if it's just the network, it's La Red de Iglesias Movilizadas. Did you hear the R's rolling there? Huh?
Yeah. Pastor Tony Ritchie said, would you look at that? Would you just look at it?
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. All right. So
I need you to come preach a Spanish revival at our Spanish congregation.
I'm ready. I feel like I'm close. Just a couple weeks of Rosetta Stone and I'll be right there, bro.
I mean, you'll be saying, hello, how are you today? Where's the bathroom?
Bro, so for real, the only Spanish I legitimately know, like is Donde está el baño? That's all I know, bro.
Right.
Gotta know that. Right. And you know where I learned that? This is hilarious. You know where I learned that?
Where?
I learned that from Adventures in Odyssey. Donde está el baño? Yeah.
Being interpreted. I got to go.
Said, where's the bathroom?
I got to go.
It's awesome. It's awesome. All right, so we're here on a Tuesday afternoon, a little bit later than normal, that we're recording it live. So we appreciate everybody that's jumped on today and the great engagement we've already got going on. We got a good topic today. So do us a favor, just hit the share button, make sure people know that we are live. And we were off last week, Ken. We're off last week and is in Colombia fighting off tarantulas. I don't think I told you this. I went horseback riding.
Yes.
It was quite an adventure.
Did you feel like John Wayne?
So this is what's hilarious. Okay, so my wife had quite a bit of trepidation about riding a horse anyway. And bro, God's honest, they put her on the most mentally handicapped horse in the history of humanity. This horse was the dumbest horse ever. Bro, I mean, immediately out of the gates, just like couldn't even hardly walk. It was the dumbest horse ever. So we had quite an interesting time. So it was good. Colombia's beautiful, man. It's a gorgeous place. The Andes Mountains, right in the heart of it. So it was a good time. So I'm thankful. I am thankful to be home. Glad to be home in America.
You went and saw the Andes Mountains, and I went to Olive Garden and got some Andes mints. That was the extent of my adventure.
And you were excited about it. I will tell you this. So up in the Andes, we went to this place. and for
Uh-huh.
13 years running, they have been voted the world's best coffee by, like, not just they just randomly pick
Mhm.
themselves, like,
By the
it's like
coffee people.
the official people that view it, and it's amazing, bro. It's just this coffee farm up in the hills on a mountain. They got this little shop that's outside and whatever. It's pretty amazing. So, not being a coffee drinker the entire week, all I had to hear was, how horrible of a person I was because 'cause I'm not a coffee drinker in Colombia, but it is what it is.
You know what?
So, I
Y
need to go to the
Listen,
country where there's sweet tea. Like, where's the greatest sweet tea? I think they've got that outside the US, but it's all good.
that's way
So,
down south in Dixie. Hurrah, hurrah.
for real, for
That's where
real.
you go for there.
All right, we're gonna get rolling today, and we got a great topic. This is gonna be a great conversation, great discussion, and I'm gonna let you just kickstart this. And I think this is gonna be so. I want people to kind of hang with the conversation because I do believe, Ken, we're gonna. So the topic today is the DNA of a new missional community,
A new
and
missional committee.
right, and I think this can be a maybe a missed perspective because
Mhm.
DNA determines so much. We talk a lot about culture and the importance of culture and, how it dictates and drives a lot of behavior. But man, we often, so I'll kick it off this way.
Yeah,
W- we're raised in broken home. We were raised around each other, but not in the same home for the majority of our childhood, right?
right.
And but like people are blown away when I used to go preach for you, way back
Yeah,
in the day,
very much so.
evangelizing, and people would be like, "Dude, it is the weirdest thing how many mannerisms that you have that's just like our pastor," and like, crazy things that I would say, having no idea that that was the case. Of course, now we're around each other a lot more than we used to be, so those kind of things kinda happen. But man, we got some strong Dillingham genes.
It's
It's in
very
the
crazy.
it's in the DNA, and, like, there'll be times where, like, our wives will look at each other, somebody be telling a story about something we do that usually it's, like, one of our weird quirks or, something dumb that we do, and they'll just look at each other like, "Dude, this is the weirdest thing," because, my husband does the same exact thing. So, the point of
Mhm,
it is DNA, man, is
mhm,
such a powerful force. So when we start talking about the DNA of a new missional community, it's something that ought to be just
mm.
deeply ingrained
Wow.
that we don't think about it. You don't have to try to make it happen. It just naturally flows out of who you are and what you are. And so I want you to just get us started on this conversation about what we're talking about when we say the DNA of a new missional community and why that's such an important piece.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so. I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head about the value, the importance of DNA in the sense that, in many ways, this is the DNA is um, the nature versus nurture
Yeah.
discussion,
Yeah.
and and how much of it is nature and how much of it's nurture, how much, how much of it is just, man, how much of it is just what we are and who we are versus what we've cultivated and valued and pushed forward and you
Sure.
know and whatever. um I think an example of that is, um that your children have a value of the gelatin style cranberry sauce.
Oh,
We're coming towards
yes.
Thanksgiving, and so
I'm
we got to bring it
bro,
up in late September.
there's nothing like it on the planet. When you just
Yeah,
when you do the can opener and you take the top off and you just flip it over, pull that can up, and that thing just stands straight up
yeah,
and it's just
with the
perfect. It's just
rings
oh,
from the can, and
it's
and
glorious.
I think that's the thing where, that's probably not something that is, that's probably not something that's in their DNA. That's probably just something that's been cultivated. Maybe, they've
Sure.
seen you, and it's been celebrated. Um, so I think today, when we look at DNA and we say, man, how much of what we do is just sort of in the DNA of who and what we are. For example, in a collectivist culture, we talked about, you know, how things are done there and how it's valued. It begins to be sort of ingrained in how they are and what they do. Somebody one time said to me, they said, well, there's a multiple elder framework in the New Testament church. And I said, no, there's a multiple elder framework in the church in Jerusalem, because 1500 years before Christ, Moses brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, and Jethro said, this is too big for you. There's no way you
Sure.
can do this.
Sure.
And he chose 70 elders, and it became a building block of their socio-religious culture.
Yeah.
And so like, for example, 70, that's the LXX, the
Mhm.
Septuagint,
Yeah.
the Greek translation uh, as founded by, the
Yeah.
70 elders. The
Right.
Sanhedrin had 70. So my point is that when the New Testament church was birthed, um, there were some things that they did because it was just in their structural DNA. They went
Yeah.
from house to house, and there were elders, and the elders were there. And this is interesting because the elders became sort of uh, pastors, if you will, but they weren't really pastors in the sense of what we think of pastors. And so people, when we say, like in America, you say, well, there's a multiple elder style in the New Testament church. Well, the reason why it's important to differentiate and say no, there was an eldership framework in the church in Jerusalem, is because that was a part of their Judaic culture. There isn't even such thing as elders in the Greek culture.
Yeah.
It's more based on the Senate and their socio-political framework. And so when Paul appoints elders in all of the cities that he planted churches in the Greco-Roman Empire, Paul was basically taking the eldership model of the initial church and applying it into a place that it wasn't really necessarily their culture per se.
Right.
And I think, and he didn't go in and say, well, we're going to have, they're going to do elders in the Jerusalem church, but we're going to do sort of a democratic style of church here, because that's really more of your sort of DNA and framework. So I think this is important, just entering into this conversation, because in many ways, when we talk about having a book of Acts multiplying disciple making movement, um, even when we say new, in a new missional community, what would that be? Well, we would say probably a church plant. But
Yeah.
when you say the term church plant, there's an automatic baked in
Yeah.
expectation.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that's important as we set the tone, is to say, so like connecting all those dots. The New Testament church in Jerusalem, when the Holy Ghost fell, there were 3,000 added to the church, and then they went from house to house, and there were multiple elders. James was, the bishop of the church in Jerusalem, and so you find that there were these, there was a church structure that was in place, but it had been in place for 1.5 millennia.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily that was what, it was what was sort of in their DNA, and that's what they expressed. When we say a church plant in the United States, a lot of times the idea, the mindset which is in the DNA is, well, what is a church and how do we get there? And so when we say, what is the DNA of a new missional community, this is a new and sort of redefined
Yeah.
concept. And
Yes.
we're not even using the word church plant, because church plant automatically suggests and insinuates a different kind of DNA that isn't sometimes totally reflective of the book of Acts.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think obviously in the wisdom of God, unless you're born again, right, you can't be a part of the kingdom.
Right.
And so how does DNA, DNA comes to us through conception and then through birth. And when we're born, there are certain,
Mm,
things that we have that's just built into our DNA. And so
mm,
I think there, I don't think, I know that there should be DNA that's built in for every spirit-filled believer that then should be produced in community when we come together and navigating through that. And so I I think this is one of the things, kid. I remember years ago, Dr. Fred Childs, I was driving him around. He was speaking for us, and he was telling me a story about how he was at Bible college, and he was asking these Bible college students. He said, "If you were going to go start a church, what would you do?" And he said, literally every one of them said, "Well, I would go and I would like look at what this church did, and I would, bring in this piece, and I'd bring in that piece, and I would read guys that have been successful and see what they've done." And so he said, I let him go on for a long time, just throwing out ideas, and even threw a little gasoline on the fire, like, "Oh man,
uh-huh,
yeah, these are some great thoughts. Like, definitely want to hear it."
right.
And he said, after about 30 to 45 minutes, finally he stepped in. He said, "I think it's interesting that not one person said that you would go to the book of Acts to see how that they applied in their culture and what
Wow.
they did
Wow.
there. Like you're reading books about guys telling
Wow.
about the revival that they had. So I think that's it just left an impact on me of like we are so guilty of looking again, defining what the win is, and in our culture, right? So you talk about like democratic, he didn't go set up a democratic style church. You look at
Uh-huh.
American culture and some of the things that have kind of trickled down over the years, and so a church plant, when you think of that, immediately you think of building, you think of attendance, you think of like all of those kinds of things. But I do think it's important to go back to and I know this sounds cliche, but go back to like what should be birthed out of us naturally, those of us that are born again, not just in what we would call like pastoral leadership or ministry leadership, but every spirit-filled believer, what should be coming out of us naturally that produces missional overflow that then would produce
Mm,
missional community, right? There should
mhm,
be
mhm,
something in us that just is so we may live in an individualistic culture, but there should be some collectivist piece that we incorporate, right?
mhm.
Because we're
By
spirit-filled
one spirit are you
believers,
baptized into one body?
and you're called to right. And we see that in the book of Acts. And it wasn't just because they lived in a collectivist culture. It was the DNA of the body of Christ
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
care for each other and take care of each other and all that kind of stuff. So talk to us about
Yeah.
some of
Good.
these DNA pieces. What
Yeah.
so I think maybe start with this. So you kind of hinted at it, talked a little bit about it.
Yeah.
Let's go backwards just a little bit.
Let's do
Maybe
it.
talk to us about, you highlighted new missional communities
There
and the
you go.
difference between that and church plants. Let's
Yeah.
talk about what you're talking about with that. And then we'll go back and say, okay, now let's look at what should naturally be produced because it's in the genetics of the body of Christ that's birthed in the spirit.
So powerful. Okay. So, so Stephanie and I were talking today about what would we do if we just come from a North American missions church planters retreat where the focus was on church planting. The focus was on um, the focus was on how many churches have we planted and what are the outcomes and so on and so forth, and what do we need to do to advance that message and the mission and so on. And so we were talking about, she asked me the question, what would you do? Like, what does that look like? And and I really in just this like moment of time had to make the statement that the core DNA of the missional movement of Jesus Christ is transformed disciples who go and make disciples,
Mhm.
who make disciples.
Yeah.
So the mission, so I think that the DNA, Jesus said, "Go tarry in Jerusalem till you be endued with power." The regenerative power in our life is the power of the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
which is a missional spirit. He says, "You will be filled with power, and you'll be my witnesses." Right? The
Yeah.
go. right? So the go in the gospel um, is directly connected to the regenerative force, which is regenerative in the sense that it's transformational, but it also moves us towards the heart of God and the mission of God. You'll be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. And so this idea is that when the Holy Ghost comes, when His Spirit comes, those people then who are filled with and baptized with the Spirit, and we've talked about this in the podcast before, but in
Yeah.
the book of Acts, they could have sat in the upper room and said, well, what if there's more? Or let's wait and see if there's like another phase of this.
Yeah.
No, when the Holy Ghost came, they went outside into the streets of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Like, if there's any better testament that the Holy Ghost in the hearts of people is a missional spirit, it is that when the Spirit came in the upper room, they did not stay in the upper room. The
Right.
Spirit drove them out of the upper room out into the streets. And then it says, and there were added 3,000 that day. And so I think that, so the DNA of a missional movement is, or a new missional community, the DNA is the smallest building block, and that is that we have the Spirit of Christ, which is
Yeah.
a missional spirit, which is a regenerative, transformational spirit, and that each individual. So, if you want to make a baby, you got to have an X chromosome and an X chromosome, or an X and a Y, determining whether or not it's male or female. And those two first genetic building blocks come together. There's one genetic piece from the woman, and there's one genetic piece from the man. When those two come together, then there's something that begins to multiply,
Yeah.
and cell division happens. And so I would say that the fundamental building block, just like DNA is the
Right.
fundamental, that the fundamental building block of a new missional community is starts with the one-on-one relationship,
Mm.
a disciple making a
Mm. That's so
disciple
good, man.
in a transformational environment where the Holy Spirit's involved, and that person is experiencing new birth and transformation in their life, that then begins to divide out into all different places.
Man, that's so good. That's so good. And it is contrary to the North American approach,
Yes.
right, to launching
Right. You don't need
new
folding
mission communities.
chairs. You don't need a storefront. You don't need music. You don't need to have the building blocks of a new missional community. You just need one transformed person with the Spirit in them, driving them to find another disciple.
Yeah. And it's even, when you launch when you launch a new missional community, so say like a traditional church plant, from an attractional model like we've talked about, it's just not reproducible because there are only so many dream teams that are available. And
Yeah,
the reality is, here's what you find. At the end of the day, it's not really any of that produces growth regardless of the size of the church. And it's
exactly.
that's not what really produces growth in any of it.
That's right.
Whether you're a person living in your neighborhood, whether you're somebody who is trying to launch let's say a church plant in a neighborhood or a new community or whatever, or you pastor a small, medium, large size church, whatever, the thing that produces growth is what you just said. Why? Because it's in the DNA. It's in
That's
the
it.
genetics of it. You may be able to make some impact, you know, attractional model. It may produce some growth, but here's the thing, Ken. When you start gathering in consumers, now all of a sudden you lose some of that. They don't have the genetics, they don't have the DNA of multiplying disciple makers, missional disciple makers. At some point, that's gonna stop having an attraction, right? At
Right.
some point, there's gonna be another church. As a matter of fact, I had a pastor when I came into town, and he told me, he said, he said, "Look," and it wasn't, it was meant in a very good way. Like, it wasn't derogatory in any way, shape, or form, but he basically said, "Look, don't get don't get overly excited because you get a rush of people that come in." He said, "Because you're new, you're exciting, you're this, you're that." And he said, "But when it all shakes out, a lot of those people who just come in to check it out, see what's going on, see the new show, see the new exciting thing, they're not gonna stick around." And that's what happens in a lot of places, a lot of churches, and they kind of grow, and they experience that. But if you don't have what you just mentioned, Ken, if you don't
Uh-huh.
have that in your DNA, doesn't matter what size, doesn't matter where you're at, doesn't matter what you're doing, it won't work.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
the opposite, though,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter what size you are. If you have that DNA, the foundation, and this is why we hammer so hard about be, make, multiply, because
Yep.
it's the simplicity of the creation of God that he's put into his body. And that is regardless of whether you're just an individual, or whether you're a church planter, or whether you're pastoring small, medium, large church, whatever. If the DNA of that church is everyday missionaries, everyday
Hmm.
spirit-filled people living on
Hmm.
mission,
Hmm.
it is going to produce multiplication.
Hmm.
It's in
Yeah.
the DNA.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Jesus said, go make disciples, go, comma, into all the world, preaching the gospel to every creature,
Yeah,
right? Go, comma, all that stuff, comma, make disciples. I mean,
yeah,
you, you could extract the where, you can extract the how, you can extract, and what you come up with is go, make disciples. And I think that you can't separate the action verb go
mhm,
and make disciples.
yeah,
There's an intentionality to that. There's a movement. Go is a word. You said, what does go mean? If somebody says, what does go mean? Like let's say they're from Colombia,
yeah,
and you
yeah,
say something about go. You say, what is, they said, somebody may say, what does go mean? What's the word go? And you could say, well, go means up from where you are, you know, up from where you are, out.
right,
And
right,
so, and so, so here's the deal. Go doesn't mean to where you are.
right,
That's come.
yeah,
Go is up from where you are. And so I
sure,
think that the whole New Testament church had this DNA in them that they embraced the go. They understood that what it meant was, I think, Day of Pentecost. The
yeah,
go took them out from where they were, where the Spirit first fell. They didn't memorialize it. They didn't sensationalize it. They didn't whatever. They just went
yeah,
by the power and the inspiration of the Spirit. They went, and without the go, there is no missional expansion. Now, like you said, you could have your dream teams, and you could have your whatever, and you could have your church planning model, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and you could have your advertising, you could have all whatever. But here's the deal: at the end of the day, whatever is going to be effective,
yeah,
regardless, whatever is going to be effective is to get this to them.
right, right,
And we subscribe to the idea that getting this to them is actually more effective and more biblical than getting them to this.
mm,
And it, and I think
okay,
that, and it may seem like, and it may feel like, it may feel like, what's the difference? But here's the deal. Usually this is very locked in to one geographic place at a certain specific time of the week, getting them to this, but getting this to them is, it really has the capacity to be a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week thing.
yeah,
I mean, You say, how could it be 24 hours? Well, if you got people working the night shift, this may still be getting to them. While the pastor who preaches the Sunday sermon,
Yeah.
which is getting, let's get them to this, and this is a message and whatever. And there's that's not devaluing it. Like there's power in that. There's great results in that. What we're just simply saying is that the biblical model really doesn't say, do all you can do to get them to this.
Yeah.
It's no, do all you can do to get this to them.
Mhm.
Take it with you. Take it with you as you go. Take it with you at the marketplace. Take it with you. Take this to them. And that is the DNA of a new missional culture.
So here's the question, okay? Here's the question then.
Yeah.
If that's the DNA that is just in us, we often say that the Holy Spirit is a missional, right?
Mhm.
So if
Mhm.
that's the DNA, and I know we've talked a lot about like just the culture of consumerism, and we've talked a lot about all of that. So I guess the question is like, you know, why are we not maybe seeing more of just the natural missional
Mhm.
overflow in
Mhm.
not people that feel like a secondary calling, right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
what you nailed
Right.
down was the initial call for every spirit-filled believer is to be a disciple maker, be a disciple that
Right.
makes disciples.
Yeah.
So not somebody that's just a secondary, but why do you think it is that we're not seeing as much missional overflow happen in spirit-filled believers? They're good people, love God, faithful, they serve, they
Sure.
come, they do all the things. If it's in the DNA, why are we not seeing that happen? How do we cultivate that? And then I want you to talk about how we can capitalize on that
Mm.
to
Mhm.
produce new missional communities.
Mhm. Mhm. Well,
Does that make sense?
I yeah, I think this is what you're asking kind of goes back to what I initially said, when I said using the words, what is the DNA of a new missional community,
Mhm.
is a very different kind of phrase than, well, what is the strategic plan of a good church plant.
Mhm.
There's just so much there's just so
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
difference in those two statements. And it might be like, okay, what is the outcome that you want? Well, we want the outcome of what Paul's outcome was to Ephesus and
Yeah.
Philippi and Thessalonica and Corinth and on and on and on. We want there to be a gathered body of Christ, of regenerated, transformed disciples who make disciples in that place.
Yeah.
The end result is, oh, so you want a church. Yeah. But here's the deal. But the moment that I say we need to plant a church, blah, 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 I think that the reason why, and I'm kind of sticking to the sort of the new thing a little bit more, because this was the thing that I think was difficult, because when in the conversation that Stephanie and I had was, how her question was simple, was fundamentally, how would you plant a church here?
Mhm.
We were sitting in a city, a community, okay? And she said, "What would you do? What would you do to plant a church here?" And I said, this was what my I think the basis of it was, I said, we would pray that God would lead us to persons of peace. We would pray that God would lead us to disciplable people. We would pray that God would open the door and show us people that are being drawn by the Spirit and that are open to that, responding to that. And then we would create a discipling relationship, one-on-one discipling relationships. Then we would move towards those discipling relationships, then are put into X groups or multiplying disciple making communities, like a
Yeah.
small subset, just like just like the two building blocks that we were talking about, right? The X chromosome and the Y chromosome, or the X chromosome
Yeah.
and the X chromosome, and those two things get together. And what do
Yeah.
they start doing? They start multiplying, and somehow the DNA results in a body. What I would want
Yes.
is let's get that DNA going. Let's get one disciple making one disciple.
Yeah.
Let's then have multiple of that begins to form into a that begins to form into a something that begins to resemble, right? Cell division begins to resemble something that is, this is becoming something.
Yeah.
How amazing would it be if
So good.
if right, if Adam and Eve had the ability to somehow see, like, X-ray vision, what was going on in her womb the first time she had a baby,
Yeah.
and they're like, what's going on in there? Wouldn't that be cool if God had shown them and they're like, what in the world is going on in there? And they're
Yeah.
like, it looks like it's becoming something. And then a little bit later, they're like, are those eyes? Is that a head? What is
Right.
this? And the next thing you know, as it multiplies, it's like, holy cow, Eve, there's a human in there.
Yeah.
How in the world did that happen? What would happen if, and this is my thing, what would happen if we had the DNA of a disciple making a disciple in that basic building block, that
Yeah.
X and X chromosome coming together? And there's transformation and it begins to multiply, and you have X groups, and then those X groups come together into a larger group, a home group, whatever. In other words, all then you gather in all those X groups and say, hey, look at what God's doing among us. And then you pray together, whatever. And then the end result is, my Lord, look at this. We've got a church here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that would, to me, that would be the result of DNA producing a body of Christ in that town, which is the missional community of Jesus.
Yeah. And the average church size in America is what, 70?
Uh-huh.
Somewhere in that ballpark, right?
Yeah, I think
And
it's
and
76.
most experts will say the reason why is because that's the place that you reach where you have, you're able to support a pastor, you have facilities, you have ministries and all that kind of stuff. And so when you're built on, like the traditional Western culture church plant,
Mhm.
right? Now all of a sudden you reach a certain size and a person only has a certain amount of capacity and bandwidth to be able to manage and be able to handle that. And it takes an exceptional person, how many conferences, bro, have we seen that's like break the 100 barrier,
Yeah,
break
right,
the 250 barrier, right? And there's
right.
these different things that happen. Why?
Which,
Because
by the way, doesn't have anything to do with DNA.
has nothing to do with DNA,
Right,
right?
right,
That's what I'm saying.
right,
So you reach certain plateaus because the things that got you there, you reach the maximum of what you can do at that point. So now you got to figure
mhm,
out a different strategy of how to get from 100 to 200 and and all those
right.
different things. But with what you're talking about is you get that DNA in every spirit-filled believer, and it doesn't change regardless of what size the congregation is, doesn't
Mhm,
matter the location, none of that matters. It just continually reproduces.
mhm.
And I love the beauty of that. So I'm gonna throw you a hard question.
By the way, let me throw
Yeah,
something.
go ahead.
W- w- The the there's no such thing as having a conference teaching people how to, or teaching a how to break the zygote barrier.
That is amazing.
How to break the
There's no
zygote barrier.
there's no seminar for that?
No seminar.
Oh,
There's no
man, I didn't
seminar
know
for
that.
how to break the zygote barrier.
And we
It's
still have
lots
babies?
of babies, lots of babies.
Wow.
Yeah, and
What?
nobody's ever come up with ever come up with this novel idea of how to break the zygote barrier. Somehow the DNA that's been put into reproducible something, the seed,
Yeah.
has the power of reproduction, and the DNA is in that. And when the DNA gets together, it just happens. And non living things, AKA institutions, don't have seed. And so we have to have seminars on how to break barriers. If we had DNA, it just would.
And this is why you talk so much about the B piece, man, because you can do a lot of things, but if it's not who you are, at some point that's going to come out. And that's why I love the way that you broke down and you walked through that process. Like if you were going to go start a church in whatever community you were in, right? You're going to go start a church. This is what it's going to look like. It's not anti-gathering. As a matter of fact, there's an importance of the body of Christ coming together and being edified together and having that community. So that, I mean, what you're saying though is it's so critically important. Again, X and the chromosomes come together, right?
That's
And
right.
it's the one-on-one. It's the individual piece that comes together. And when you have that,
Bro,
yeah,
writers X and Y.
right, right.
Oh,
Right, right. When you
yeah.
have that from the beginning, now all of a sudden it's not, you don't have to try to reteach people from being like, you know,
Yeah.
good
Yes,
volunteers.
bro.
You don't have to teach them how to be missional. It's just like you don't have to teach me how to be right-handed. You don't have to teach me how to act a certain way because it's just in the DNA. And I think one of the places we really struggle, Ken, especially in church planning, man, I've really been burdened lately. Personally, like I've really been burdened. Like, man, we've got to launch missions. We've got to get
Mhm.
missional
Mhm.
overflow out there.
Mhm.
Like it's and I honor, bro, we
Mhm.
honor all of those men and women that have sacrificed. You've been in their
Mhm.
shoes. I've been in those shoes. You
Mhm.
sacrifice, you take a risk, you go out there and you do the best that you can with what you have and what you know. So we're not throwing shade at anybody that's done anything a
No,
certain way. But
no.
what we are saying is what if we could from the very get-go put in people the
Yeah,
DNA of the
yeah.
multiplying Book of Acts church,
That's it.
that as you're going to see expansion, you're gonna see growth and that multiplication. What if we could start with that and put that in the people from the beginning rather than try to get the best music, the best lights, the best buildings, the best whatever? Let's put it in
Mhm.
them from the get-go and
Mhm.
and watch that expansion take place.
So true. And I may, Tony Richards on here, and he knows what I'm talking about. I may need a preaching point application by the time I'm done with this podcast. Um, but he makes this great statement. He said, Paul said in Galatians 1, these things weren't taught to me by men, but revelation of Jesus Christ. He said, that's our source. And I was actually thinking about that. Like the apostle Paul didn't go back to Jerusalem.
Yeah,
It was interesting. Paul didn't go back to Jerusalem to get validated.
yeah,
Paul said, what I got from revelation of Jesus Christ. He didn't go to Jerusalem to get validated. He went to Jerusalem to affirm
mhm,
that what Jesus showed him was what Jesus had shown them.
yeah,
He said, lest I had run in vain. In other words, if there was a piece of it that I needed, right? So there's humility in that. There's
yeah,
humility, but it's not a false humility that says, well, I need to go to get validated. I need to go to them. Because what he said was, he said, that, whether there are somebody or not, whatever, but I didn't go for that reason. I didn't go to get
sure,
validated by them. I didn't
sure.
go, I didn't go to get their approval, which I'm not saying that we shouldn't, that that we should just plant churches and not get approval of
Right, right, I know what you're
what
saying.
okay. So but I think that the thing about it, Stephanie said to me, she kept asking sort of like the then what question. So where would you start? I said, we could start with you and me.
Yeah.
We, we'll find somebody who Jesus is working on, Jesus is talking to. We'll go find someone, we'll find, I mean, it sounds terrible. We'll find a fertilizable egg. we, we'll find something that can conceive
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
That is um, that is willing to let Jesus change what they care about. Somebody who's willing to let Jesus become Lord. Somebody who wants to be transformed, and so on. And we'll find that, and then either they or we'll find another one, and those cells will start splitting. And that what we call cell division is actually multiplication.
Yeah.
And they say they divide the, I mean, two cells divide out to two groups of two cells, which is actually multiplication.
Right.
And so um, she said, then what? I said, well, then when those divide out to having a group of 4 or 5 or whatever, we'll have X groups, which are then it intensifies that multiplication, that transformation, and comes together and gives us the power of community. And that's the first building block of community. The DNA builds into automatic production of community,
Yeah.
and it's built together into
And
something. You're
bro,
being built.
there you go. 100%. It builds into it because it's part of the
It builds
DNA. Sorry, I didn't mean to
into
interrupt you. So it builds
community,
in. Yeah.
right? So what we're doing is we're not trying to see this is my thing, and I don't and again, and I don't want to be, we're not throwing shade on anything, but I don't want to create the shell of a human and then try to fill it up with cells.
Mm, that's a
That would
great
be
analogy.
that would be
That's
a
a great
model. That would be a model where we'd say, what validates whether or not you have an actual church plant? Well, I got board approval. What validates that you got a church plant? Well, we got musicians, and we got folding chairs, and we had a Sunday service, and I preached a sermon.
Mm,
And we say, hey, we got a church in such and such town. Why? Because they had church.
bro. Bro. That's
And
so
so what
good.
is that?
That
So what is
analogy
that?
is so bad. That analogy just smacks you right in the face. Like
Right.
you
So
can
what? Right. What is that? Well, we've got a shell. We got a shell, and we're going to try to fill it up with cells, and hopefully that will produce a body. The outcome is going to be a
mm,
body. Okay. Wait. Why don't we just go back to saying we've got a family on site who are transformed, who have the Spirit of Jesus Christ in them, that know how to go find disciplable people, and that thing is going to produce until eventually we're going to look and go, well, looky there. There's a body.
yeah.
And it was funny what Stephanie kept saying. Okay, so you said, all right, we're going to have you and me, and we're going to find disciples. We're going to come together, and we're going to grow into community. It's just going to, when we multiply, it multiplies into community. It's going to be X groups, and then it's going to multiply, and then all of those X groups, then they're going to multiply into a conglomerate of X groups, which is going to be, right,
Yeah.
a larger a larger grouping of that multiplication, and then that's going to come together, and it's going to look more and more and more like a body, more and more like a missional community, more and more like a church, and that they may meet in a home for a while. And she said, and then what? Well, and then it may be too big to meet in a home. Okay, and then what? Well, then maybe what we do is we have a group in this place and a group in that place and whatever, and we find a place for that's big enough for them all to meet. And her point was, how do we arrive at a body of Christ? What does it look like? What do they do that doesn't eventually end up in what would then become, we lose that,
Mm,
and we just have what we're coming from.
Mm, mm. What I would say to that is what's in the DNA.
Exactly.
And, so to your point, I think so, the story when the woman built a room for the prophet and he asked, "What does she want?" And, "I can give you you
Yeah.
know, you can get land, you can have this, you can have that, whatever. She wants a child." Gaze, I said, she wants the child. And so he says this, he says, "This time next year,
Hmm. Hmm.
according to the season of life,
Hmm.
you'll have a child." I
Hmm.
think I think one of the biggest challenges, Ken, is he Jesus didn't, or God didn't give her just a baby tomorrow. Right? He
Hmm.
didn't he didn't like, he didn't give her the promise, and then tomorrow she had a bouncing baby boy, 8 pounds, 7 ounces or whatever. It
Hmm.
was according to the season of life. It had to go through that process. It had to go through the process of what you're talking about, cell division and multiplication that happened
Hmm.
within the womb until all of a sudden there's a baby that's born according to the season of life. I think one of the biggest challenges we face is because of the way we get validation and the
Hmm.
way, like you said, yeah, we got a church, is it's easy. Oh man, I don't know if I should say this or not.
Hmm.
It's easy to build Frankenstein.
Hmm.
It's easy to build the shell and say,
Hmm.
"See, we got a body. We're good. We got a body." But
Hmm.
if there's n
And
the
by the way, you start feeling this deep desire to fill the body up. And then what happens is then you're like, well, let's take a little piece from that body over there, and let's take a little piece from that body over there, and let's take a little piece from that body over there. And all of a sudden now you're filling up the body with pieces of body from different bodies from different towns and different churches. Because why? Because, well, we got this shell and we got to fill it up somehow.
and it right, and it may not, it may reject. Right? And when you try to bring it in from someone transplant, it sometimes rejects it, but it makes us feel like validation. We've got this. And my point about the story is, like, that process takes time. It just takes
Right.
time. And there's not a lot of evidence. There's not a lot of, I mean, obviously you can see the mother as the baby begins to grow, you can see the growth from the external, but there's not a lot of evidence of what's really happening, what's really going on. But what you're talking about is the long term return is so much better because now you have a body that has the DNA of the Spirit of God that becomes a reproducing. So regardless of whether it's an infant, a toddler, a teenager, young adult, middle age, elder, doesn't matter how old the body is,
Mhm.
it still has the DNA. And
Mhm.
it still produces and still should
Mhm.
produce all of that. So, like you said, there may be, the importance of the gathering piece, and
Mhm.
again, at the heart of everything that's done, regardless of the size of the body, it is ultimately about the mission, and
Yes.
what that expression looks like might
Mhm.
vary at different stages of life.
Bro, see, that's the thing. The thing that actually hit me after we had that conversation
Yeah.
was was if we work to get the DNA in it, I don't really care what it looks like in the I mean, it's
Yeah,
in
no, I
other
know what
words,
you're saying.
right? Like it's not like okay, but are you still going to have? I made the statement. I said, I don't know. Based upon what you're called to do, you may have and you may not have. You may have a Sunday school. You may not. You may have children's or youth, or you might. That's the thing is to say those are all in an institutional context. Those are the kidney and liver and organs of the
Yeah.
church,
Yeah.
of the right, in an institutional context. People are like, well, I'm not going to that church. They don't even have a youth group.
Right.
And
Right.
it's so then the idea, which goes back to your question of why do we find so little of this?
Mhm.
Why? Because this is back to the nurture or nature. This is back to what's in the DNA. This is back to, you got to have you got to have the gelatin cranberry sauce for it to be true Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
That's a nurture thing. That's why I said that's probably more nurture than nature. They
Sure.
probably didn't, at 2 years old and they're just learning how to make phrases and they say, you know, me want cranberry sauce, like it's this natural
That would have made me
instinctive
so
thing.
proud. Oh,
I
man.
know, right? It would because you've been like, oh, they do have my DNA, but no, for real, it's probably not as instinctive.
Yeah.
It's probably more, it's probably more nostalgic
Mhm.
because it's
Reactive.
right. It's part of the expectation. It's not Thanksgiving if we don't have that on the table, right?
It's
And
not
so
church if we don't.
it's not a real church. And so the question then becomes, okay, so then what is it that actually makes it a church?
Mm.
Bro, listen,
Well, that's a
listen,
great conversation.
listen. I'm gonna make a statement right now that could really paint a target on my back. And I'm just gonna make the statement. Okay.
I like it. I like it.
I know of a situation where there was a guy. He pastored a church, and in a town not far from them, they have a culture, okay, sort of a missional culture, and in a town not far from them, that they had people that were connecting with their neighbors and whatever, okay,
Yeah.
and they were there. There was a group of them that resulted. It was just in their DNA.
Yeah.
They were getting together for pizza and hanging out and playing rook and talking and chilling, and then there were spiritual conversations, and then they realized, dude, that person's disciplable, and they're like, hey, we got this. And so the next thing you know, there were probably 10 or 15 of them in that community. Next thing you know, there's 60 of them
Hmm.
going to the church over here, 50, I don't know, 20 minutes away.
Right.
They were all driving over to the church. The pastor says, I think it's time for us to formalize this group.
Yeah.
We've got somebody that's going to go there. He's been trained and whatever. So this person went, made an application for a new church plant. Okay.
Yeah.
The application was denied. They said, well, we've already got a church there. Right. So they denied doing a church because we already have a church there. Okay. And said, so they denied
Technically,
them
you have
having.
2 churches there.
That's exactly what he said. It's exactly what he said to the
Sorry.
district board. He said, no. He said, no, we already have 2 churches here.
That's awesome.
He said, we just don't have a formal designation by the institutional church that we had 2 churches here.
Mhm.
But we do have 2 congregations. One of them has a name, and one of them is just an organic result of missional multiplication.
Yeah.
And basically the point I love this idea that says it's, look, just overflow,
Just overflow.
just overflow it and just overflow it and let the people that are in the positions figure it out.
Bro. We've had some of those conversations, and I've literally said, "Look, you designate it however you need to designate it." Like, for
Whatever.
us for us, it's just part of our mission. It's not this designation or that designation or this designation, and, we're not looking for funds, we're not looking for like,
Yeah.
we just have people living on mission, and it's
Yep.
bubbling up, and this is what we're gonna do, and, that's it is such a hard thing, like you said, you know,
Like, call it what you want. I mean, call it
call
what you want. I get it. And you know what? Here's
and
the
we want
deal.
accountability, we're not saying don't be
That's
accountable.
no, that's the point. I think the point is the point is, though, is to say, you, you know, I think that what happens is when there are the more people appreciate and embrace a Book of Acts apostolic culture, the more they understand, man, there's just going to be overflow.
Yeah.
The more they understand, if we've got the culture in place, there's going to be, bro. I've heard David Bernard say this.
Yeah.
I heard somebody asked David Bernard, who's the general superintendent of the United Pentecostal Church. Somebody asked David Bernard, said, how did you sort of break the culture into, to really have a vibrant mindset in South Texas? And you know what he said? He said, we just simply said that the Assembly of God has one church per 35,000 people. We've got one church per 90,000 people. We got work to do. And he said, and so if there's a town of 70,000, then let's agree that it has the capacity for two churches.
Mm.
And he said, and we just went off that model. It's, our goal is to have at least one church per 35,000 people. Now, I understand it's the institution sort of trying to figure
Yeah.
out it's,
Yeah.
whatever. But at the end of the day, I think that if you do have this mindset that says, look, here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to understand that we're going to create a culture where there are going to be people and there are going to be connections and there's going to stuff that happens that we just can't paint nice, cute little lines around it and put it in boxes. And it's just going to, Tony Richards said that today we heard a statement said, sometimes you got to get the book, you got to get the church out of the box to get it back in the book.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great statement today. We were having breakfast with somebody who said, sometimes you got to get the church out of the box to get it back in the book. And what would it be like if we just simply said, look, let's let the DNA of multiplication create such overflow that it creates complications of, wow, what are we going to do with this?
Man,
Just
so
like a
good, bro.
couple who has twins and they didn't expect twins and go, holy cow. Oh my God in heaven. What in the world are we going to do? Right? The
Yeah.
parents are the ones that got to figure it out. It's not the baby's fault.
Yeah.
And so the more we embrace that, the more we have that culture, the more this is the thing, like, even with Chris, even like, what would you do if you went into this community and you had, what we were talking about was you had this missional DNA that started finding disciples and the disciples grew and you said, okay, but what if that outgrows the homes?
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll follow the leading of the Spirit at that point. What if, okay, but what if we decide that we want to have a baby and we find out that we go to the first ultrasound and they go, okay, you sitting down? There's 3 of them up in there. And by the time they pick the mom and dad back up off the floor,
Yeah.
they're like, we better do some planning and figure out what
Yeah.
we're going to do with all this. And I think what would happen if in other words, rather than saying, hey, how can we have triplets?
Right.
Let's just have overflow. Let's just
And
have
we'll
let
figure it
DNA
out.
do its thing, and then we'll figure it out. We may say, you know what we'd like to do is we're trying to reach a region, and so we're going to just go ahead and say we're not going to try to gather
Man,
it
bro.
bigger and bigger and bigger. We're just going to have we're going to try to keep it where we can keep it in homes. And so we say, hey, would anybody be willing to travel here? Would anybody be? And we're just going to try to keep it in homes, and we're going to try to figure out how can we, and maybe we might need 3 different places to gather, and we may have to do that, one on Saturday night, one on Sunday morning, one Sunday night, or we may have to. I don't know.
Man,
I don't know. We're just gonna.
you're getting me fired up now because, how much have we spent strategizing, having a strategic
Mhm,
plan on how we're gonna
mhm,
do this and, do
mhm.
all of those kinds of things. But it goes back to, like you said, just being as simple as you possibly can of reproducing. And then you figure it out along the way. As you grow, you figure it out along the way. And I think that's a great way to, I mean, we could have this conversation for a long time. And, we've made some statements that I just wanna, make sure people understand, like, we honor, man, we honor and celebrate. You've been in the shoes of a church
Yeah,
planner,
100%.
and a lot of this is coming from our experiences and the frustrations that we've had in that process. And then, having to try to recreate, having to try to go back and maybe undo some of the things that we did building a church off of,
Mhm.
the institutional
Mhm.
model versus just
Mhm.
multiplication, reproduction,
Off
and
a
so we
different
honor it.
DNA.
Offer different DNA. Right, build the shell. I love that. I love that, you build the body and then you try to fill it with cells, and that's what we did, and so we honor and celebrate. We celebrate the successes. We celebrate anything that produces growth. What we're saying is, man, what would happen, bro? What would happen if
Mhm.
we unleash the greatest force, and that is we just it's in the DNA of every spirit-filled believer. What if if we, uh put the attention on that and facilitated that it then produces the missional overflow. Here's what would
Mhm.
happen. I honestly believe
Mhm. Mhm.
we'd be like Peter and James and or Peter and Andrew, James and John, and they'd have to call for other boats to come and help and drag them
Right.
suckers up to the shore because
Right.
there's no way my net can handle that,
Right.
bro.
Right.
That's what we need to focus on.
Chris, at the end of the day, and just to summarize for 13 years, I was a home missions director.
Yeah.
I value high ecclesiology. I
Mhm.
value Jesus created the building blocks of the future of the church were disciple makers first,
Sure.
who then who then had the power to serve others. The last thing that Jesus said was, here's a towel. I'm going to wash your feet. This is the model. This is the way, right? This is the context that you're going to govern the result of what I first called you to do.
Mm.
I first called you. See, the thing about it is Jesus knew that he would have a problem if he first taught them how to govern.
Mm.
He first taught them how to be disciple makers. And then he says, now this is the way you're going to govern
That's so good.
the result of this is the way you're going to lead it. This is the way you're going to and serve it.
Yeah.
And I think that
That's
if we could
phenomenal.
say, I believe in governance, I believe in the structure of the church, I believe in beautiful, amazing ecclesiology that Jesus created and all the biblical the hues and colors and dimensions of the biblical the teaching. I think that the thing about it is though is let's get to the place where we say, look, the DNA is going to do its job. Let's let
Yeah.
the DNA, if we got the DNA in there, we value all these other pieces. But here's the deal. I'm not going to try to sit over here and govern something to create, or I'm not going to go over here and try to produce something that no, it all happens naturally and organically if we have the right DNA in place.
So good, man. So good. Great conversation today. Appreciate everybody joining us at this unique hour, this unique time,
Mhm.
hidden kind of bled over into separate time just a little bit for those on the East Coast. Appreciate everybody being a part of the conversation today. I feel like this is something that is going to be a major part of the conversation as we move forward because I feel like today was a really vital piece
Mhm.
of this journey and as we look to launch new missions, whatever that might look like, it might not look the same, right? We got the same DNA. You got the beautiful head of hair. I got the chrome dome, but still got the
Yeah,
DNA. Still got the
yeah.
DNA in us.
Same
So
DNA.
it's
Same
all
DNA.
good, man.
Yep.
It's all good. So
Yep.
appreciate everybody being on today. If you, yeah, particularly from today's conversation for pastors, if there's some level of frustration or you're looking at to find, learn from our experiences, not that we have all the answers, but from the things we've gone through,
Yeah.
we'd love for you to check us out, dillinghamgroup.org. Fill out the connection form. We'd love to contact you and just talk about how maybe we can help you on this journey. So do that. Get over to dillinghamgroup.org, all of our social media sites. Appreciate everybody being on today. We look forward to coming back to you potentially next Tuesday. We'll have more information about that. We've got some travel going on, so we'll figure that out, but we'll be back next Tuesday around 10 o'clock. Until then, go